Sticking with something like learning a second language and becoming bilingual with it, it gives you self-confidence. It gives you belief in yourself. Scientists discovered that consistently practicing a language generated higher hippocampal volume. When you tackle something like language, it is definitely something harder, especially when you are an adult.
That is the number one issue people don't realize when trying to learn Spanish.
What you're learning you're not just learning Spanish. You're not just learning Spanish or another language. You're actually learning life skills.
I'm super fired up to have this young man joining me on today's topic to talk about learning a foreign language and how it benefits your mental health. Julian Hayes II is an author, an executive health and performance advisor. He's a wellness consultant and founder of Executive Health. His boutique executive wellness consultancy helps top performers operate with world-class health and performance and gain a competitive edge in today's dynamic business environment. He's also the host of Executive Health and Life. Lastly, he's a Forbes CEO Network contributor and has authored over 300 plus articles featured in top publications such as Inc., Entrepreneur, Success, Chief Executive, and many others. Please help me welcome Julian Hayes II. Hey, Julian, how are you doing today?
I'm doing super fantastic. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm looking forward to this topic. I don't ever get to discuss it.
Absolutely. So as we know, Mental Health Awareness Month in the month of May, and we're going to jump right into some of the questions that I'm going to ask Julian on the advantages of learning a foreign language, and specifically for us learning Spanish, and how it improves your mental health, as well as how it can help you in the long run. We want to make sure that we're working on the brain as much as we work on our nutrition and our bodies. So my first question to you, Julian, is how does being bilingual potentially enhance self-esteem and confidence in social interactions compared to those who speak one language?
Yeah, there's a lot of angles you can take on this, and I think we'll do this during this interview, is that you can look at this from a scientific perspective, but then you can also look at this from a practical, real life perspective as well. And for me, when I worked on my language and everything, and it's still a journey today, I grew up not necessarily the most confident of individuals. When you tackle something like language, it is definitely something harder, especially when you are an adult, just like learning how to swim. The older you get chronologically in age, the harder it's going to be. And the same thing with language. So sticking with something like learning a second language and becoming bilingual with it, it gives you self-confidence. It gives you belief in yourself because you stuck with something. You done something that most people don't do. You done something that most people say they're going to do and they never do. And what happens then with that self-confidence, with that self-esteem, that's going to translate over into other aspects of your life.
I actually took my late father for his 70th birthday to Cuba. That was one of his lifelong dreams, childhood dreams, was to travel to Cuba before he died. And so with seeing the effects of what I was saying in a conversation with those people, and then seeing how he reacted to that, gave me more confidence in myself and boosted my self-esteem. And now I was in the position of, I have to look out for my father, authoritative role, but more so in the driver's seat while we were in La Habana. And so it gave me that boost that I needed. And it was kind of like a pat on the back, you know, from learning the language and being able to use it, and seeing how that, you know, me in a conversation with someone, my dad being like, oh, wow, this is amazing, blew his mind. The confidence was from the accolades, if you will. So my next question is, what psychological effects might adults experience as they learn a second language? And how could this process influence their self-esteem and personal growth?
Yeah. And so this one here, you can go to the science a little bit, where there's been a lot of studies that have shown that bilingual individuals are more adept at regulating their emotions and coping with stressful situations. And another fancy word to say is helping their neuroplasticity right here. And this is a form of when you are learning a language, you are definitely working your brain. And this is a form of mental exercise. We oftentimes hear physical exercise, going to the gym, but we have to forget that our brain needs exercise as well, because just like most things in life, if you don't use it, you lose it. It's going to atrophy, which we'll probably get to later on other aspects of the brain. So this is helping to reduce stress and anxiety, also tying into that point previously that we talked about, where you're talking about belief and self-esteem. A lot of times people who are very anxious, and it's not clinically based, but it's more lifestyle based, environmentally based. We're seeking some type of control, and we have none of that. And that's why these feelings are coming. But by finding something as learning a language. This is something that we can do to start taking control of our life. There's a lot of things in life that we don't have control over, or there's a lot of things in life that we want to improve, and they're going to take a long time to start to show fruition. Whereas we can start with a language today. We can start with 10 minutes and learn a couple of words today. And we already are building up momentum. We already are keeping our word to ourselves. And that's all going to tie in and build up the self-esteem and personal growth.
That's awesome, because I think about, when we think about like psychological effects on adults, the info about language and the psychological effects it can have on a man or a woman as an adult. I kind of related it back to high school when we took English lit classes. And so, we talk about things like tragedies, right? The tragedies, man versus man versus himself. And this is one of those things that I feel like knowing or learning a language, as you take that journey on learning a language, you're in a tragedy, you're in an internal conflict, if you will, man versus himself. You are actually trying to, overcome some of the identity situations you may have with, like imposter syndrome. Morality situations could be a tragedy situation for you. Desires to be fluent, and then you're even dealing with mental health. Like you're dealing with, am I good enough? You're asking yourself, you're second guessing yourself. Is this the language I should be learning? You're dealing with internal conflicts, right? So as people progress along in a language, they start to feel empowered. Mm-hmm. And then they end up overcoming some of those barriers and obstacles and challenges that they deal with when we're on this journey of learning a language. And then it ultimately, over time, they do almost a 180. They become well-versed in the language that they're learning because they're putting forth that constant effort, as well as they're now starting to transform their self-perception. How they look, as well as how they appear to people in public when they're speaking that other language. And they're confident. Once again, confidence levels go up. And I think, you can speak to the science of it, but I know for me, if we had to relate this to something that people could understand, not so much on a language component, but if we're thinking about from a weightlifting or an exercising, the endorphins are released as you I think I was watching a short of yours. It was you were talking about how your leg, I think it was cramps or whatever. You were talking about how you found that inner push, that inner desire to keep going and keep moving. And I think this ties into that. But from a mental standpoint, as I learned how to utilize this language, and people, they actually understand me when I say something in a sentence, and I actually can understand them. I know people's confidence levels. I can see it happening. It's like, bro, I'm on a whole nother level now. Like they actually understand what I'm saying. This brings us to our next question. How can learning Spanish as a second language enhance communication in Spanish speaking settings and positively impact mental health through improved relationships?
Yeah, you have so many different avenues and angles that you can take here. When you're thinking about relationship, depending on your age or where you are in your life cycle, you think about actual romantic, intimate relationships, and maybe you're opening up ability to meet different women, to meet different men in terms of finding the one for you. Whereas if you're just monolingual, that's all you have. Whereas bilingual, even trilingual down the road, you have just so much more opportunity to do that. And sticking in this area of relationships, you also have professional relationships and business relationships. The world is becoming more and more global. Spanish is, in the States, the language to know for not just even personal, but professional reasons. And it's going to be that way. You look at Latin America, you look at a lot of countries in South America now, those countries are up and coming, meaning you're getting ahead of a lot of different business opportunities from going to Mexico and investing, being able to speak the language. You're getting better deals. When you're trying to move somewhere, you're going to get better deals because you are able to integrate much more deeply with the culture because you know the language. Even if you don't know the culture, you can at least speak the language a little bit. Even if it's not perfect, the sheer fact that you are putting effort in is more than probably 95% of the people that go there are going to pull it in. So you're building up this linguistic skill now, and you're having a much more broader social network. Once again, this is all going to tie in together. By doing these things, this is definitely improving your self-esteem and your belief in yourself. You're going to walk with a different energy. I find that the moment I went out and I went to a salsa club in the US and I spoke in Spanish, I felt like $1,000,000. It was a basic sentence. I just asked to dance. I felt like $1,000,000. You couldn't tell me
Absolutely.
nothing. You couldn't tell me nothing. Their face
Absolutely.
their face lit up. They're like, "Oh wow." Yeah, their face lit up. They even asked, where are you from?" I was like, "No, I'm just from Tennessee." But just something like that is that spark you need, that thing that's going to get you hooked. And start now I can hear the music and I hear a few different words here and there. I'm infusing in that culture. And by infusing in that culture, for me, I love music. So this is how I start to learn the language a little more. I listen to music, not necessarily. Some people watch TV and watch shows. I listen to the music, and that's how I got to go in there. So you're getting this appreciation for the culture diversity. This is going to help, of course, with tolerance, understanding history and where they're coming from, open-mindedness, and you have this sense of global interconnectedness. All tie this up, and it's all going to contribute to having a much more improved emotional well-being.
You hit it right on the head right there, where when you talk about strategic business relationships, this is not necessarily a corporate situation. It's not necessarily, oh, it's a transactional situation where a business relationship can just simply be networking with someone that is a Spanish speaker. No English speaking people in there. They brought in a couple of bands from Guatemala, Venezuela, Colombia. They were doing not only playing the music, but also showcasing the different Colombian and Venezuelan styles of salsa. As I'm there, people looking at me, they're like, he's out of place. But then when I opened my mouth, it was like, oh, snap, he's not out of place. And so then, well, what do you do? And then the number one question, I just did a short on it, was, ¿Dónde aprendiste español? Right? Where did you learn Spanish? And short side of that whole thing is, I ended up meeting people that work in Charlotte in small businesses that their native language is Spanish, and they call, contact, Instagram when they have questions or they have things that they need to get done in English, but they don't trust their English. They know that they can explain it better to me in Spanish, and I can work as the intermediary, if you will, of the information that they're trying to convey to somebody. And so setting up those, and they also know English or monolingual speakers where they always, hey, can you teach Spanish? No, actually, there's a better thing. So they send clientele. So it's not necessarily about the money all the time, but it can also, well, it is about the money, because if you think about it, clientele comes and they pay. But I think, needless to say, it's not in a transaction situation all the time. It can also just be simply networking, which is actually going to boost it. And I know having clients that actually come to me and say, hey, I need to learn Spanish from a professional setting or for a professional setting, they can learn one or two phrases. And they call me or they email me and they're like, oh, those two phrases. Now, the opportunity to speak more with native speakers. I've actually branched out and gotten on, committees where we're working from a global network standpoint. We have, headquarters in, Madrid or wherever. I actually get to, sit in on some of those committees. So it's some of the things that you get as advantages in your workplace. Could be you could get accelerated into a whole nother position. There's opportunities there because then people are like, hey, I see you know a little bit of Spanish. How about we give you or contribute to some professional development and we'll pay for you to take Spanish. And then they come back to me and they're like, don't even have to pay for the class. They're paying for it. So want to be cognizant of the idea that just simply doing something on your own can open up doors that you never really even would have imagined being open just by you putting forth, like you said, 10 minutes a day, 20 minutes a day. Start small and then, of course, work your way up. What mental health benefits might individuals experience by expanding their social networks through fluency in Spanish? If we wanted to drive it right home, in Spanish, because this speak Spanish now, but, what mental health benefits might individuals experience by expanding their social networks through fluency in Spanish compared to those who are monolingual?
Yeah, happiness. happiness, joy. I mean, it's to be able to just go to a restaurant. And I experienced this first in Portuguese, and then I
Okay.
later experienced in Spanish. But when I was Portuguese, I can give you a great example that is applicable in Spanish as well. So when I went to Portugal, and I knew a little bit at that time, and I just got into talking at a cafe, I got invited to this really nice art function because of that. And they're like, "Oh, okay, he's not like the regular American." I told them I was from the South, and they had an expectation of pickup trucks and Taylor Swift in Tennessee, and then you blurted out some of that Portuguese, right? And it was Brazilian Portuguese, but still, it's they still understood it. And,
Absolutely.
yeah, and and I had a good time that night. My happiness went up, my fulfillment, my self-esteem.
Yes.
And with the Spanish thing, being able to go to a hole in the wall restaurant that is the best food in town,
Right.
that most regular people don't go to
Right.
because they're nervous about the look of it, or they can't speak, right? And the waiter comes out in Spanish. I can't hear everything just yet, but I know enough to order. I know enough to
Absolutely.
survive. And you get pride from that.
Yeah.
You get pride from that, and you get self-belief. And it's just, to me, you feel much more capable as an individual. And
Yes.
and I think people feel that presence. They feel that energy. When you are more self-assured as yourself, people can feel that energy, because a lot of times nonverbal communication is the predominant way. It's 93%. Only what we say is about 7%. So
Right.
people can sense that confidence and that energy that you give, and just doing this language thing is another way to stack more wins, stack more conditions in your favor to really be that assured person and tackle some of these other goals.
That's dope. That's dope. So let's switch gears a little bit and then now get into the good stuff here. So long-term brain health, right? So
Mhm.
how does being bilingual influence cognitive resilience and brain health over the lifespan?
Yeah, this is a very cool one, because a lot of times most of us are not going to really see or have our brains hooked up to the machine. But one of the things as you get older is our brains atrophy and they get smaller. And that sounds kind of interesting at first. That why would you want a big brain? But if you think about it, primitive times, people had bigger brains. You
Mm-hmm.
probably say they're smarter as well. So one of the more significant benefits of learning the second language is to increase the volume of your brain. And this should be music to your ears. It's an evolutionary advantage. You're strengthening various mental muscles. And I actually have a research study in my head because I wrote about this. Is that I think it was the October 12th issue of Neuro Image. Scientists discovered that consistently practicing a language generated higher hippocampal volume, which happens to be the cerebral structure whose main task is linked to our memory.
Okay.
So I'm not a doctor. I only tried to play one for a year, then I left school. But so I'm not so I'm not going to say that it's going to prevent that just by itself. But I will say the more you use it, the less reason that you're going to lose it. Meaning that the more things that we can do just naturally. Of course, some things that happen in life, but the more things that we have control over, such as this, keeping our brain working, the stronger our brain's going to be as we get older.
When you spoke on increasing the volume of your brain, I think this is the part that drives it home for me. And the light bulb went off when I was reading over the information that we were going to cover. Increasing the volume of your brain by being bilingual, right? So thinking about from a mind perspective, or the brain, right? If I've been speaking two languages for over 35 years, got to do some math. I'm not a math person. Language. The volume has increased as I grew, as I continue to flip back and forth, is what I think I'm understanding, right? Fast forward, I'm now doing on Duolingo, right? Romanian for a week, and then I switched to Portuguese for a week. Then I flip back and forth every week. I don't know if a normal person can do that. That's still trying to learn just one language. But if you have two languages already in your bag, if you will, taking on two more languages at the same time is a lot easier for you because you've got that memory component of what it took to get to being bilingual. You've also got the volume or the space to actually continue to challenge, because technically being bilingual is a challenge, right?
Mm-hmm.
But are you challenging your brain like you were when you were learning that second language? This is my scientific, interpretation of what you're saying, but I need to continue building and strengthening my brain, even though I've already reached a goal in becoming bilingual. And I think you can continue to increase the volume by adding on more languages, kind of like what I did. I don't know. Maybe that works. Maybe it sounds right. It sounds good in my head, right? So my next question, can regular use of two languages help delay cognitive aging or the onset of neurological diseases compared to monolingual individuals? This is what we came for. This is the meat and potatoes we're trying to get to.
Yeah, and so more and more studies are showing that it will help to play a part in this, basically the brain's ability to adapt and reorganize itself, which is simply just neuroplasticity of it, is that you're keeping more neurons firing. You're giving our brain a reason to stay active. You're putting it under eustress. And eustress is a word that you'll hear in the lifting world, where a lot of times you see people, they may get smaller. Their muscles used to be bigger, now they're smaller because they're probably not putting themselves under much tension and stress now. Whereas with the language learning, you're going to do that. So here's an example that you can bring this home with. There's learning on Duolingo. There's watching a show on Netflix in Spanish. And then there's being out in Mexico City or Argentina and speaking Spanish. And that's three different levels. And that's essentially the equivalent of maybe doing a bodyweight squat, a barbell squat, or a goblet squat.
Mm-hmm.
All going to work your legs, different levels of tension, different levels of difficulty.
Right.
But it's all working on helping your muscles. Same thing here. All three of those examples, the Duolingo Spanish, the Netflix Spanish, and then actually being in a city where it's a native language. Everything's in there. Your brain's having to work more. Just going to the bathroom, just going to the menu is in Spanish now. It's not in your native language. So you're having to think constantly. And so what I learned when I traveled, I was fatigued from the day. Even if I didn't do my normal 2-a-days, I was fatigued. I was fatigued because I had to think so much more. So my brain was having to use more and more energy, and that it wasn't used to initially because everything was in that language. Whereas at home, I control my exposure to it. It's like training camp in the NFL and then week 5. And then the playoffs, there's different levels of intensity.
It's easy to understand when you give an analogy like that. So as we move along, though, improved cognitive functioning, right? So in what ways does being bilingual enhance cognitive functioning?
Yeah, this is probably my favorite one. So I have like 10 domains of cognitive fitness. And so all these are not going to fit here. So I'm not going to name all 10, but I will run through some of the bigger ones that pretty much also fit what this thing called executive functioning skills. So number one is better problem solving skills, which is applicable both in personal life and professional life. We have multitasking abilities. We have improved memory retention. And if you remember earlier when we were talking about memory retention, we were talking about the hippocampal volume and that increasing. So once again, all these points that we're mentioning, they're all going to stack upon each other.
Okay.
And so, and then also this cognitive stimulation that we're talking about here can help prevent, potentially delay, and even prevent the onset of cognitive decline, and then potentially things like dementia and Alzheimer's. And there's, of course, a couple other things that go with that, but still, this is essentially exercise for your brain, another form of exercise for your brain. So some of these 10 areas of cognitive fitness, number one, we already mentioned, was the memory. Another one is attention and attention span. We live in an ADD world. And you got YouTube Shorts now, you got TikTok, you got Reels, all these things that it's just like 10 seconds. Well, you can't learn a language that way. You're not going to be able to do it. So therefore, by practicing this ability to work on your attention span, you can translate that into other aspects in terms of your professional work. Think if someone's a creator, they do YouTube or something. Once again, that's focus, deep work. That's going to require time and meticulous attention to detail on there.
Right.
And so something that you wouldn't even think about of, I'm learning a language and it's actually benefiting my creating skills. I'm becoming more creative. I'm becoming a better business person. I'm becoming a better husband, a better wife. Yes, and a better parent. Absolutely. Because you are working on your attention span, giving your undivided attention span, not being so all over the place, not so fragmented with your attention. Another one is organization, planning, and logic.
Okay.
And those are all grouped together because think about this. When you're learning a language, you're learning different verb tenses. You're organizing this, okay. And then you're learning things like masculine and feminine, okay. Organizing that, where I'm putting that. You're planning, okay. Subject, verb, et cetera, et cetera. Logic, okay, this makes sense. This is why they do this, et cetera, et cetera. Once again, those skills that you're learning language are skills that are applicable to your everyday life. And then lastly is creativity and imagination.
Okay.
Learning a language makes you creative because a lot of us are going to figure out ways to learn things, figure out ways to, how am I going to remember this? How am I going to use my imagination when this person is saying a sentence? I can't hear everything, but I hear a few words. And so I'm going to imagine, use my intellect and my brain creativity to put those two pieces together. Or like when I'm hearing a song, hear a melody, and then as you start to speak that language, you start to speak in that rhythm and melody because that's
Hmm.
how you heard it. And so all those things put together, you are essentially, once again, improving your cognitive fitness that is, once again, going to be used and utilized in every other facet of your life.
And that's dope because cognitive fitness, I guess now that you say it, the way I explain it is working on tonality and working on being able to mimic. So
Mm-hmm.
using the art of or the skill of mimicry
There's a
to
rhythm.
improve your Spanish speaking abilities. And that's cognitive fitness.
Yeah. And there's a rhythm, right? For instance, for me, I'm still learning Spanish, and so there's a difference that I can hear now. Whereas I have a friend, she's Chilean, and even she said, "My language is, you don't want to learn Chilean
Okay.
as the first. That's a harder one, right?
Mhm.
Because of the dialect and the way it's
Yes.
spoken.
Yes.
Whereas maybe go for more of the Mexican Spanish or the Colombian
Colombian, Costa Rican. Yeah.
or the
Right.
Venezuelan, right?
Right.
Because of tonality and everything. And to me, I hear that is that there's the Chilean Spanish, because I listened to it, it was tough. It was like words that either they didn't exist or they're brought together. And so it just had to work my imagination and creativity more to just like keep up and try to think about what they were saying. So we're going to talk about imagination. So one of the things with imagination and
Oh,
one of
okay.
the other things to go with cognitive fitness is that imagine certain scenarios that you can see yourself in
Okay.
more often than not. For me, I think about scenarios like when I'm in Patagonia and I'm doing either a marathon or ultra marathon there, and I'm going to be running, and there's just going to be nothing but Spanish around. What are some of those words? How am I going to communicate and et cetera, then? And it's just like everyday logic, right? So I see myself more in that scenario than me at a nightclub. So I'm going to learn more of those words and gravitate toward that to keep myself learning, motivated to learn, and also stimulating my brain.
That is the number one issue people don't realize when trying to learn Spanish. You have to put yourself in a particular situation. And how are you going to either get yourself into that situation or how are you going to get yourself out of that situation? And if you're not doing situational Spanish or real world situation Spanish, what are you learning? People are learning, I like to eat bread. How is that going to help you in a real life situation? Like if I'm like stranded on a highway, me knowing how to say, a mí me gusta comer pan is not going to help me when I need gas in my tank, right? So people don't realize that just talking to people, that's cool. But if you're not going into a conversation or if you're not accessing these particular ancillaries that you're using or these things that you feel like, oh, this is going to help teach me, and you're not finding what it is specifically that you want to learn, not only are you going to quickly lose the motivation, which is going to ultimately depress you and then give you that concept of, I'll pick it up whenever. Mm-hmm. It goes hand in hand. But as soon as I say, okay, imagine myself in this particular scenario, Patagonia, right? Imagine myself in a hotel lobby, right? And I need to check in. What am I going to say? Gun to the head. Well, I shouldn't probably say that, but you know what I mean? Like in that situation, how are you going to play that part? What are you going to do? And so I think imagination is something we lose. And if it's, for the older crowd, and I'm speaking for myself and anybody else older than me, we all remember there was a show on TV called The Muppet Babies, right? It was but it was the cartoon version. Every episode was Kermit, Miss Piggy, Gonzo, all of these, Muppet Babies were imagining themselves in certain scenario. And, as a kid, you're just like, oh man, what if I was that, So it's the same, it goes hand in hand. And a lot of times we lose the things that we learned early on in life. And we forget about, oh man, Muppet Babies. Yeah, I remember that. put yourself in the same situations that are real life situations for you. As we begin to lay the plane here, so we're talking about emotional intelligence, right? How might bilingualism influence a person's emotional intelligence, particularly in understanding and managing emotions across different cultural contexts?
Yeah, so this kind of ties into the social and relationships that we spoke about earlier. But, and also, once again, you'll notice a common trend here is that what you're learning you're not just learning Spanish. You're not just learning Spanish or another language. You're actually learning life skills.
Okay.
You're actually leveling up as just a human being in general. And all these tools and skills that you're using is going to be used on your day-to-day life. So we know about EQ, natural intelligence, and all that, but EQ is a very big thing in this world. Think about a lot of soft skills, whether it's something like understanding, having perspective. Those things are huge. Those are small nuances. Those are things that we often overlooked, but those things can make the biggest difference between sometimes in the professional world, job, opportunities, maybe coming across that person that you just had your eye on, and maybe you don't display that emotional intelligence the right way, ideally, and you just lost that opportunity. Same thing in social situations. Social IQ, EQ, they're all connected together. And it's about this communication skills. So when you're learning these nuances, you're learning how the language sounds. You're learning that like rolling an R and hearing a language is not just it's just doing that. There's a type of expression and emotion behind that
Yes.
that can be picked up over time that you start to understand of what's this culture understanding and meaning behind saying this word like that. There's emotion behind these words.
Right. Right. And I think with that, so when we speak on that concept, once again, I'm not a psychologist. I took one class, right? But my mindset is, and for me, this is absolutely 100% true. When I speak English, I'm one person and I act a certain way, or I engage in conversation in a specific way. But when I flip over to a conversation in Spanish, I am I won't say a totally different person, but my level of empathy is different. I would say my excitement levels go up even more because I live for a challenge. I'm that guy, and so the deeper I go into a conversation in Spanish, it's like, let's keep going, baby. Let's keep going. And it's just kind of fueling the fire, if you will. And it's just like, bro, I am in this conversation right now in Spanish. I feel like the peacock, you know what I mean? Like it's got the feathers out, it's like, showboating around. Like that is the mindset as I'm speaking. I don't see things like taking place or whatever, but you get that confidence boost. Like, look at me, like it's one of those things. So I definitely understand what you're saying when you talk about that, as far as how it can improve a person's just well-being from just being able to go back and forth between those two languages. And I think, just to add on to this, I want to ask you a question. Could being bilingual or working towards being bilingual be a life hack for better mental health?
Absolutely. You're taking something that for all intents and purposes is all in your control. Just like exercise, it's all in your control. And so a lot of times, for me, when I dealt with my father's death, one of the first things for me was to do something that made me get out of bed, do something that made me get back to living. And to do that, you wanted to pick something that I had full 100% control in. 100%. So I can control what I put in my mouth with food. I can control moving my body. I can control taking 10 minutes, 5 minutes even at the very beginning and learning 2 words.
Absolutely.
Just learning they don't. Learning at stop. Something as simple. You are building confidence. You're building self-esteem. And everything is predicated on your self-confidence, on your belief. Because when times come hard and we talk about resilience and mental health, we rise to the level of our standards. And so if you have worked on creating a higher standard through various activities, such as one, learning a language and doing something hard, doing something that makes you delay gratification, makes you be disciplined, makes you be consistent. These are lifelong skills that translate to every other facet. So you are going to be not only mentally healthier, you're going to be emotionally healthier, even spiritually healthier, and most likely physically healthy, because how you feel, the positive benefits that you feel from doing language learning day in, day out, that's a great feeling. And those vibes are going to carry over to other aspects of your life. So it's very much a underrated, non-scientific, no double-blind placebo studies with language and mental health. But as an N of one myself, and other people I've talked to, and just how I know how psychology works, this is one of the best things you could do. Because also, for most of us, we want to learn a language because we're interested in that country. We're interested in going to that place to travel. We're interested in the culture, maybe the women, the guys, whatever. And so now you got two birds. You're building the skill up, working your brain, but also you have something much more exciting and positive to look forward to. So now, if your future was cloudy and filled with anxiety and depression, by learning, but more importantly, by using that imagination and creativity we talked about earlier, those clouds are moving away. It's getting a little more sunnier because you have something to look forward to. And that's going to help mitigate and alleviate some of those anxiety and depression that we have.
Great information. And we can land the plane on this. And I want to thank you, Julian, for joining us. If you are watching this right now and you want to get more information about executive health and life, I'll drop his link to his YouTube channel in the description below, as well as any links that he provides me. I'll also drop that in the description below. And make sure you check him out. He's always giving good information, not just straight, mental health. I just know Julian as a colleague of mine in this creator space. And so he talks a lot about health and fitness and things like that for the mindset, as well as for executives, but more so for people. But even myself, of course, you can think of yourself as your executive of you, like you are the executive of yourself. And so you can gain a lot of information from Julian. I want to thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me on. I enjoyed this. I've never, ever, ever, ever have gotten to talk about language and connected that with health. So it was definitely something that made me have to be a little more creative, but also made me think about my own life and the benefits it's brought to me.